Have you ever wondered why so many spiritual people still suffer? Why do people who meditate every day still feel anxious? Why do people who have spent years reading spiritual books still feel empty inside? Why do seekers who have dedicated decades to the spiritual path still struggle with fear, loneliness, frustration, and dissatisfaction? If spirituality promises freedom, why does suffering remain? This is one of the most important questions a human being can ask. Because almost every person who enters spirituality enters it with the same hope. The hope of finding peace. Not temporary peace. Not the peace that comes from getting what we want. Not the peace that depends on circumstances. But a peace that remains untouched by life. A peace that remains whether we succeed or fail. Whether we gain or lose. Whether life gives us pleasure or pain. Most people begin seeking because something hurts. Perhaps a relationship ended. Perhaps they lost someone they loved. Perhaps anxiety became overwhelming. Perhaps depression entered their lives. Or perhaps they simply looked around and realized that despite all their achievements, something was still missing. Life had given them what they thought they wanted. And yet the feeling of incompleteness remained. So they began searching. And spirituality appeared as a doorway to freedom. The teachings sounded beautiful. You are not your thoughts. You are not your emotions. You are not your body. You are awareness itself. You are already whole. You are already complete. These words touched something deep within. For the first time, life seemed to contain a possibility greater than success, wealth, relationships, or status. The possibility of true freedom. And so the journey began. Books were purchased. Videos were watched. Meditation techniques were learned. Retreats were attended. Hours became months. Months became years. Years became decades. Yet many seekers eventually arrive at a surprising realization. They are still suffering. Perhaps the suffering has become more refined. More subtle. Less obvious. But it remains. Why? Because spirituality contains a hidden trap. A trap so subtle that most seekers never notice it. And until it is seen clearly, suffering continues. The trap is seeking itself. The mind is addicted to becoming. Before spirituality, it says, if I get more money, I will be happy. Then money arrives. The happiness fades. So the mind creates another goal. If I find the perfect relationship, I will finally be complete. The relationship arrives. Again the happiness fades. Then another goal appears. This process continues endlessly. The mind is always chasing fulfillment somewhere in the future. Always believing that peace exists somewhere else. Somewhere ahead. Somewhere not here. Then spirituality enters the picture. And the mind simply changes its target. Instead of seeking wealth, it seeks enlightenment. Instead of seeking success, it seeks awakening. Instead of seeking a better life, it seeks a better state of consciousness. The object changes. The movement remains the same. The mind still says, what I need is not here. What I seek is somewhere in the future. When I finally awaken, then I will be free. And so the seeker continues searching. Day after day. Year after year. Always moving. Never arriving. This is one of the greatest paradoxes of spirituality. The search for freedom can become the very obstacle to freedom. Imagine searching everywhere for your glasses only to discover they were resting on your head the entire time. The search itself prevented you from seeing what was already present. Many spiritual seekers spend their entire lives doing exactly this. Searching for what they already are. Searching for what has never been absent. Searching for what is present right now. Yet because the mind is focused on reaching a future destination, it overlooks the simplicity of the present moment. And this is where suffering continues. But the story doesn't end there. Because there is another reason spiritual people continue to suffer. And it is far more subtle. Many seekers believe that knowledge will set them free. So they collect teachings, books, quotes, concepts, methods, philosophies. One year they study Advaita. The next year Buddhism. Then Zen. Then Taoism. Then non-duality. Then self-inquiry. The mind becomes a library of spiritual information. And yet peace remains distant. Why? Because information is not transformation. Knowing is not being. You can read 100 books about swimming. But until you enter the water, you cannot swim. You can read 1,000 books about love. But until your heart opens, you do not truly know love. In the same way, you can read every spiritual book ever written, yet still remain trapped in suffering. Because truth cannot be collected. Truth must be discovered directly. And here is where the ego performs one of its greatest tricks. Before spirituality, the ego says, I am important. I am successful. I am smarter than others. But after spirituality, the ego becomes even more sophisticated. Now it says, I understand awakening. I know the truth. I have advanced spiritually. I am more conscious than other people. The ego survives. It simply changes its clothes. It exchanges worldly superiority for spiritual superiority. The prison remains. Only the decoration changes. This is why many seekers become frustrated. Years pass. Practices continue. Teachings accumulate. Yet something still feels incomplete. Because the one who seeks freedom is itself part of the illusion. Think about this carefully. The seeker wants enlightenment. The seeker wants awakening. The seeker wants peace. But who is this seeker? What exactly is searching? Most people never stop to investigate. Instead, they assume the seeker is real. They assume the seeker will eventually arrive at some destination called enlightenment. But the great sages pointed to something shocking. They suggested that the seeker itself is the obstacle. The one searching for truth is what prevents truth from being recognized. This sounds absurd at first. How can the seeker be the problem? Yet look closely. Every search is based upon a belief. The belief that something is missing. The belief that you are incomplete. The belief that fulfillment exists somewhere else. But what if that assumption is false? What if nothing is missing? What if what you seek is already present? What if the peace you long for has never actually left? Suddenly the entire spiritual journey looks different. Instead of searching for something new, you begin noticing what has always been here. Awareness. Presence. Being. The simple fact that you exist. Not as an idea. Not as a concept. But as a living reality. Right now. Before thought. Before memory. Before identity. Before the story of who you think you are. This is where the teachings point. Not toward becoming, but toward being. Not toward the future, but toward this moment. Not toward achievement, but toward recognition. And yet the mind resists this simplicity. Because the mind survives through movement, through goals, through becoming, through seeking. The moment seeking stops, the mind begins to lose its grip. And that can feel uncomfortable. Because many people have spent their entire lives searching. Searching for success. Searching for love. Searching for happiness. Searching for God. Searching for enlightenment. Searching has become their identity. Without the search, who would they be? And this brings us to one of the deepest fears hidden within every seeker. The fear of letting go. The fear of surrender. The fear of discovering that there is nowhere to go. Nothing to achieve. And no future version of yourself waiting to be completed. Because if that is true, then freedom is available right now. Not tomorrow. Not after 10 more years of meditation. Not after another retreat. Not after another spiritual experience. Right now. And perhaps that possibility is far more frightening to the ego than endless seeking. Because endless seeking allows the ego to survive. But direct seeing brings the search to an end. And with it, the illusion of the seeker begins to dissolve. But there is still another reason spiritual people continue to suffer. And this reason hides in plain sight. It is resistance. Most people believe suffering is caused by pain. But pain and suffering are not the same thing. Pain is a natural part of life. Every human being experiences it. Loss, disappointment, illness, aging, heartbreak, fear. No one escapes these experiences. Not even the greatest spiritual masters. The difference lies not in the pain itself. The difference lies in our relationship to it. Pain says, "This hurts." Suffering says, "This should not be happening." Pain belongs to life. Suffering belongs to resistance. Notice what happens whenever something unpleasant appears. A feeling of sadness arises. Immediately the mind wants it gone. Anxiety appears. The mind begins fighting it. Fear appears. The mind starts searching for an escape. The feeling itself may last only a short time. But resistance keeps it alive. The mind continues feeding it with thoughts, stories, judgments, analysis. And before long, a simple emotion becomes a personal struggle. This happens to spiritual seekers as well. In fact, it often happens more subtly. A spiritual seeker feels sadness. Immediately a thought appears. I've been meditating for years. Why am I still sad? Fear appears. Another thought says, a spiritual person shouldn't feel fear. Anxiety appears. The mind says, maybe I'm doing something wrong. Now there is suffering about the suffering. Resistance about the resistance. Conflict layered upon conflict. The original emotion was never the real problem. The struggle against the emotion created the suffering. Imagine standing in a river. The current flows naturally. If you move with it, there is ease. But if you fight the current, exhaustion follows. Life works in a similar way. The more we fight what already exists, the more suffering we create. This does not mean becoming passive. It does not mean giving up. It means seeing reality clearly. Accepting what is already here. Because acceptance is not weakness. Acceptance is intelligence. You cannot change what you refuse to acknowledge. You cannot understand what you constantly resist. And you cannot find peace while arguing with reality. The great spiritual traditions have always pointed toward this truth. Not as a philosophy, but as a direct observation. The moment resistance drops, something extraordinary happens. The suffering begins to dissolve. Not because circumstances change, but because the inner conflict ends. For a brief moment, there is no struggle, no argument, no demand for life to be different. Only presence, only awareness, only this moment. And in that moment, something becomes obvious. Peace was never created. It was uncovered. It was already there beneath the noise, beneath the resistance, beneath the endless mental activity. This is why some people spend decades searching without finding peace. Because they are searching for peace as an experience. But peace is not an experience. Experiences come and go. Peace is what remains when resistance ends. And yet the mind continues asking, how do I stay there? How do I keep it? How do I make this permanent? Notice what has happened. The seeker has returned. The search has begun again. The mind has turned peace into another goal, another achievement, another future destination. And once again, suffering quietly returns. Because the mind only knows how to chase. It does not know how to rest. It does not know how to simply be. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. Freedom is not found through more effort. It is not found through endless self-improvement. It is not found through becoming someone new. Freedom begins when the exhausting struggle finally comes to an end. When, for the first time, you stop running. Stop chasing. Stop resisting. And simply meet this moment exactly as it is. Because this moment may contain far more peace than the mind has ever imagined. And now we arrive at the most important question of all. If seeking creates suffering, if resistance creates suffering, then what remains when both come to an end? This question cannot be answered by the mind. Because the mind itself is part of the search. The answer must be discovered directly. Right here. Right now. Take a moment and notice something. Before the next thought appears. You are here. Before the next emotion arrives. You are here. Before the next memory emerges. You are here. Thoughts come and go. Feelings come and go. Experiences come and go. Entire chapters of life come and go. Yet something remains unchanged. Something has been present since childhood. Something was present during your happiest moments. Something was present during your darkest moments. Something is present even now. The sages called it awareness, presence, being, consciousness. Different names. The same reality. It cannot be seen as an object. Because it is the very seeing itself. It cannot be found as an experience. Because every experience appears within it. It cannot be achieved. Because it is already here. The mind searches for extraordinary experiences. But truth is usually discovered in the ordinary. In the silence between thoughts. In the simple awareness of this moment. In the recognition that nothing needs to be added to what already is. This is why the great masters pointed people back to themselves. Not to beliefs. Not to systems. Not to ideologies. But to direct experience. Again and again they asked seekers to stop looking outward. Stop looking to the future. Stop waiting for a special moment. And simply notice what is already present. The search for enlightenment often ends where it began. Right here. Right now. Not because something new has been gained, but because the illusion of separation begins to fade. The seeker starts realizing that what was being sought was never absent. Peace was never absent. Awareness was never absent. Presence was never absent. Only attention was elsewhere. Lost in thoughts. Lost in stories. Lost in the endless movement of becoming. For years, perhaps decades, the mind was running. Running toward a future version of itself. A better self. A wiser self. An enlightened self. But eventually something extraordinary is seen. The self that was trying to become free was itself part of the dream. And in that seeing, something relaxes. The struggle softens. The search slows down. The need to become begins to fade. And a different quality enters life. Not excitement. Not ecstasy. Not a constant spiritual high. Something much deeper. A quiet peace. A simple contentment. A sense that this moment is enough. Life continues. Challenges still appear. Pain still visits. Loss still happens. But the inner war begins to end. And perhaps that is what true spirituality was always pointing toward. Not escape from life. Not perfection. Not becoming superhuman. But freedom from unnecessary suffering. Freedom from the endless battle with reality. Freedom from the belief that fulfillment exists somewhere else. Because the greatest secret is this. What you are searching for is not waiting for you in the future. It is not hidden inside another book. Another teacher. Another retreat. Another experience. It is here. It has always been here. Closer than your thoughts. Closer than your emotions. Closer than your identity. The search ends when this simple truth is recognized. Not intellectually. Not philosophically. But directly. For yourself. And perhaps the next time suffering appears. Instead of asking, "How do I get rid of this?" ask a different question. Who is suffering? And then look. Not for an answer, but for the one who is asking. Because that single question has the power to change everything. If this message resonated with you, share your experience in the comments. Have you ever noticed yourself seeking peace in the future? Have you ever discovered moments of freedom simply by stopping the search? I'd love to hear your insights. And remember, what you seek may already be what you are.